Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the very first installment of the Lugsy Show. I'm your host, Mark Vanderlucht. I'm a BRTF student in my first year, and I'm currently here with a guest host, Zach DeWeird.
How's everybody doing?
I think everybody's doing well.
Let's hope.
The Leafs won last night. They played the Pittsburgh Penguins. They beat them 5-0 in the Igloo, Pittsburgh's home ice barn. I'm
PPG
liking what I'm
paints.
seeing.
The Igloo is the Mellon Arena. They got rid of that.
No, I know, but I just like seeing. I like
I know
saying
what
the
you mean.
Igloo.
But when I think of the Igloo, I think of Mellon Arena, where they won those Stanley Cups back in the early 90s, where Mario Lemieux played. But PPG Paints Arena, it just doesn't have the same ring to it. You know what I mean?
You know what? It was a good game to watch, just based off of everything that's gone on this past week. Everything that I've seen so far from the Leafs and what they've gone through, what they're going to do this season is very promising in what I saw last night. What did you think about it?
I did watch a little bit, and like you said, I think the Leafs dominated a lot of that game, and it was promising after you saw a few of the games early and a little bit of a dud of a couple games of the Leafs, in my opinion, only scoring once in the past two games previous. But it was nice to finally get a win in the Auston Matthews injury kind of stint of this Leaf season. So it's nice that we can finally get our foot in the door and kind of start propelling, because Auston Matthews is going to be out for a little bit of time. We do know that. So it's nice to finally get that win and maybe a little bit of confidence for the boys coming up.
Well, and another thing that's nice to see is that the Leafs are a Canadian team, and a growing pattern that I've seen in the NHL right now is 6 of the 7 teams in the top 15 are Canadian. So how do you feel about that right now?
I love it. So obviously we knew coming in that Toronto and Winnipeg were going to be good teams. We knew that Winnipeg made it to the Western Conference Final, and Toronto fell to Boston in the first round. But we both knew that they had very young teams and very skilled teams. But I think that you and I both thought that maybe the other 5 were going to struggle. We saw Ottawa, Montreal, Vancouver. We all thought, maybe not all of us, I'm sure there's a few that didn't, but coming in, I was convinced Ottawa, Montreal, and Vancouver would be competing for a lottery pick. And Ottawa, I think, is the only one who's in that position, and they're not even doing that poorly. They're above four teams in the Eastern Conference. But like you said, how 6 of the 7 teams are above the top 15, I think that's great. Edmonton hopefully is legit, and last year was a fluke. They're trying to prove that. Calgary, I think, is, I don't know if they're playing a little bit above their potential, but I think that I do hope they stay, and I think that they can prove that they belong. They're number 1 in the Pacific Division. 3 teams are in the Pacific. 3 teams are in that 1, 2, 3 spot, which I think is fantastic, especially because coming in, I thought the Pacific was one of their tougher divisions, and I thought it was top heavy, with the bottom 3 being the teams that are currently in the playoff spot.
Tampa, Toronto, Boston.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the Pacific here. So
My bad. Yeah.
San Jose, Arizona, and Anaheim and Los Angeles are all not in the playoffs right now.
No, and did you hear the news of the Kings firing their head coach today?
I didn't.
They fired John Stevens, head coach of the Los Angeles Kings, and to me, I think that is a bit of a short-sighted view. It's hard to win
move.
games.
I think it's a panic move.
It's hard to win games in the NHL, let alone without your starting goalie, and then without your starting goalie playing well or playing poorly when he is healthy. It's tough to win games, especially on top of that. And then they're dead last in goals for, and then they're top 10 in goals against, in which they have allowed the most goals. So what do you think about that then?
Well, I think it starts with the goaltending, and Jonathan Quick is injured for the second time this season, and this time's going to be another 4 or 5 weeks, they're saying. Torn meniscus. So, and obviously goalies use their knees a little bit, so
yep.
So that's a big loss.
But do you think that injury is a result of the shrinking equipment?
It could be, and I've heard a lot of goalies are upset about that, and we've seen so many times that there's pucks that just go above the goalie's pads or underneath the shoulder or over top of the shoulder because the equipment is shrinking and shrinking. And we've seen so many times goalies complain about this shrinking equipment. And at first I was like, oh, get over it. You're a goalie. save the puck next time. But now I kind of have a little bit of sympathy for him because I can see like there's goals that happen that really 2 or 3 years ago would have been saved. And I can understand why goalies are so upset.
Well, goalies, they are all about rhythm, right? I have never met a normal individual that plays goalie, right? It's just when you're getting a rubber disc shot at you by multiple people, by multiple players. Wow, for some reason I can't say multiple. That's so weird. But when you're getting a puck shot at you over the course of a full game, there's a few wires not fully connected in your head.
Right.
To me, that's just crazy. Getting a rubber disc just shot at you repeatedly. It's crazy. But then when you have your equipment constantly tinkered with by the NHL, it's not even by your doing. You're obviously going to be upset by that, which for me, I have full sympathy for the goalies. If you get all of your equipment tinkered with, your pads, your chest protectors, your blockers, and your gloves always tinkered with, it's annoying because you try and build up these repetitions and these rhythms by stopping pucks and trying to do your job for your team. But if the NHL disallows you to be able to do your job for your team, there's going to be a lot of upset goalies in the NHL.
Absolutely. And I think that, like you said, with that rhythm, it's massive. And I think that not only, I guess, have to deal with the different routine, but even their positioning has to be changed a little bit. Like I know that a lot of goalies like to kind of stay out in their crease a little bit. Now they have to stay a little farther out to make them look a little bit bigger, because that's what you want to do. You want to make the net look small and you look big, so that there's no room for the puck to go. And they have to come out a little bit farther now so that the net looks the same as it did 2 years ago.
Well, and then you get these skilled guys who have got good hands, like a Mitch Marner, a Patrick Kane.
And they can just fake one way, go the other, and you're done.
Yep. Good night, Jim Kite. That puck's in the net.
And you saw that with Marlowe's goal last night.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that.
And he just got it by Matt Murray. And I believe that maybe 2-3 years ago that could have been saved. And that was the second goal of the game. Was it the first goal of the game?
No. It was the third or fourth goal.
Tavares scored the first off the tip by he tipped Mitch Marner's shot. But anyways, that was possibly a game-changing goal. And maybe if it weren't for the equipment, it could have been saved.
Well, and then the next thing about that, though, is do you see the NHL moving around their equipment for the players?
Possibly, but I don't know what they're going to move around. So they haven't really done anything with the players. The skates are going to stay the same. There's nothing going to change with the skates. The chest protector, what's going to change with that? Or I guess I should say the shoulder pads, or what's going to change with that? But like, do you have an opinion on it? Like, maybe the only thing I can see is that visors are almost going to become mandatory, because we do see a lot of eye injuries, and those are career-ending injuries. If it hits you in the wrong spot, you look at like a Manny Malhotra, just blind in one eye.
Well, it's kind of hard to put the puck in the net when you're half blind, right?
Exactly. So
I personally don't see any changes coming to the equipment.
No,
maybe shoulder pads are shrunk a little bit just to reduce injuries, but even then, right? I find that trying to create more goals by shrinking equipment is a safety hazard. It's dangerous, because if a puck hits you the wrong way going 100 miles an hour, that could spell the end of your season, right? If it hits you in the back of the knee, hits you to the side of the knee, hits you in the shoulder, anywhere that has equipment getting shrunk more, right? It's dangerous. I like goals getting scored, but it's also nice to see a tight, close hockey game, right? Seeing a 1-0 game, seeing a 2-1 game, seeing who scores that next goal, to me, is thrilling. But when you're trying to get new fans into the game, you're trying to sell them by any means possible. You're trying to get as much skill involved in that game. You're trying to get that goon knuckle-dragging game style away from the NHL, because that involves concussions, that involves broken hands, that involves injuries.
Right, but I'm going to go against you a little bit on that because a lot of people do love the big hit. A lot of players come to hockey because it's the sport where you can be physical, and football is a big example of why that is so successful in the States, because it's a big contact hitting sport. But even that, the hits are becoming a little less because you see this season has been all about the roughing the passer, and those would-be sacks are now becoming penalties, and the fans are hating it. The fans want contact, and that's why, I mean, baseball is not a contact sport. The NBA is not a contact sport. I think that's what hockey has, and that drives a lot of fans to the game because you can hit somebody, and that's what makes the fans pound against the glass. They want to see people drop the mitts, and I think that the contact will always be there. And I'm not saying that you said it was not going to be, but I think that every team should have maybe a player who can knock drop the mitts, and I think that the Leafs need that, in my opinion. They don't have too many players that'll drop the mitts. Kadri is one, but who else?
Yeah, you know what? It's tough to say with that. I think when I'm trying to think of players who would drop the mitts, I think Marleau would stand up for himself, but I don't think he'd go out of his way to fight.
He wouldn't
Hyman, I think, would fight. Connor Brown could probably throw some hands.
But do you see Connor Brown dropping his gloves because somebody nailed Marner?
No.
But I see a Matt Martin who definitely would.
Oh, absolutely.
If somebody nailed Matt Barzal and the Islanders, and Martin was for some reason on the ice at the same time, I think there would be a fight coming.
Oh, for sure. Well, and that's the one thing where it's how protected do you want your players, right? Or it's just one of those arguments where Matt Martin takes up a roster spot. So you better expect him to be able to score goals, because goals lead to wins lead to more points, which lead to playoff seedings, right? It gets you into the playoffs. And then in the playoffs, you never know what's going to happen. You could get into the Stanley Cup Finals and win the cup. You just never know. But with an enforcer, you know that his job on the team is to not score goals, right? He has one designated job. And what's that to do?
To hit people.
Yep. And if he's not hitting people,
then he's a waste. He's a liability.
Yep.
He should be eating popcorn in the press box. But and when you look at the press box and the healthy scratches, it is a lot of enforcers in the press box. And that goes to show what you were saying, that it's a goal-oriented league. That's what the league's going for. And like you said, I'm totally with you. I think that maybe I would never hate to see a 2-1 game where you need to score that one when it's a 1-1 game and a team scores 5 minutes left in the third and it's a very exciting game. But then you look at a game that happened not far from us here in Buffalo last night, where Buffalo racked up 9 goals on the Ottawa Senators. Like, that was a big, and it was in Buffalo, the home of the Sabres, where they scored 9 goals, and it was fantastic. Like, the fans probably loved seeing 9 goals, or the red light go on 9 times in their favor. But yeah, I definitely agree with you in that maybe there could be a little bit more of a closer game, and there are plenty of close games. There's a lot of overtime games, there's a lot of shootout games, but the blowouts are not, I'm not a big fan of.
No, and it's just trying to figure out what markets the game the most effectively to new fans, because the NHL, along with so many other sports, are getting new fans, and these new fans don't know much about hockey, right? They don't know much about the rules, they don't know much about the players. Like I myself, trying to get into the NFL, what markets the best way for me is I like a high-scoring NFL game. But I still apply my same low-scoring methods of playoff hockey to playoff football. I love a low-scoring football game, right? Because every single yard counts. Every single play you do with that football counts. If you make a mistake, that could spell the game, right? It's just one of those things where you need to figure out what players, what venues, what teams, what scores, what rules allow the best viewability, right? Because if you throw a few rules here and there into the game for the NHL, it could totally break up the momentum, right? We saw it with the offside reviews. Those are like pulling teeth to watch. It's unbelievable seeing a team spend upwards of a minute and a half in the offensive zone to score, and then all of a sudden, nope, that's it. No goal because of offside. If the ref didn't catch it a minute and a half before, how is it called back? That's my only complaint with that, right? You need to be careful about disrupting the flow of play so much that you could end up screwing your whole entire league, right? Because every player is different. Every team is constructed differently. They all have their own different styles, own different play styles. So we're always going to see players play successfully with different methods of the league throwing in these rules, right? We're going to see players become good because of a rule or become bad because of a rule because it takes away from their play style.
Right, and I think that the same thing can go with the goalie interference. Last year, it was big. It was like the roughing the passer rule. I think the NHL got a little bit soft. There were calls that in goalie interference were like he maybe his stick touched his pad, and they're saying, oh, we could have made that save. But I think that it's the same kind of thing that disrupts the flow of play, and it just gets people upset. And even if there were a couple times where the Leafs were the favored team in the goalie interference, and it's like, really, was that? A few times. And they were against that rule a couple times as well. But I think that even when we were on the favored side, it was like, oh, well, that really should have been a goal.
Yep.
And it just makes the game, now you're always thinking about that one play. What could that have done? And it is what it is. Like, if it's goalie interference, it's goalie interference, I guess. But I think that the NHL has gone soft in that regard as well.
Well, the one thing I will say is that there is always going to be human error involved when it comes to winning and losing. If you win a game, more often than not, it's because of a team breaking down in their own defensive zone, either by missing their man or physically missing their man, right? Like they lose track of the puck or they lose track of their own marked man, right? And if you get goaltender interference, and then you get this whole gray area of what is and what isn't, I think that really is interesting to watch what the refs do, because sometimes there are soft calls. Well, there are a lot of soft calls, and then sometimes there are calls where, like, why didn't you pull out the whistle there? What are you doing? Are you blind? Are you blind? Right?
Yeah.
Are your eyeballs working? Are your retinas attached to your brain? Are they attached? Are you all there? Right? Like, what's going on there, man?
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things where it's interesting. Like, especially in baseball, when you see the umpire have his own strike zone versus a catcher's or a pitcher's, it's quite the firework show to watch when a guy like Angel Hernandez calls a game for the MLB. Because if he's calling a game, that pitcher better get ready. Because a whole lot of calls are going to be gray area and not going to go his way.
Right, and the worst thing there is when, because the catcher obviously knows the strike zone pretty well, and it's funny to see that sometimes the catcher will go up to bat, and then a strike that is called against him at the plate will not be called on his pitcher, and I think that's where it's a big issue when the umpire is not having the same strike zone for both teams. It's just, if the strike zone is a little bit high, it's a little bit high. Pitchers can adjust, but when they can't adjust because he's not consistent with that, it just totally throws off their game because they never know. They have to throw it over the plate, like middle, to know it's going to be a strike. And that is when I get a little bit upset with the umpires, and I think I'm not the only one.
No, and that's the one thing there's two layers to that when athletes and TVs are involved, is from a viewer standpoint, seeing the human error is incredibly entertaining, because watching the Blue Jays against the Texas Rangers in quotation marks the inning, right? Inning 7 with Jose Bautista in that bat flip, that was the result of human error. That was the most entertaining, thrilling inning I've ever seen in my whole life, and I don't think anything will touch that unless the Blue Jays have a walk-off dinger for a World Series championship, right? Nothing close will beat that until they do that, and even then that's unlikely. But still, it's just one of those things, like, for the players, that's incredibly frustrating to be a part of, right? You don't know what the ref's going to call. So how do you play your game, right? When you're pulling in these new rules or pulling out these old rules, how do you play, right? So some players you're going to see score 30 to 40 goals, and then a new rule is going to be put in, and then all of a sudden they turn ghost mode, right? Are they really that bad of a player, or are they that good of a player? What is it, right? It's just one of those things where it's up to the human eye to see what the quality of play is like, how to engage the fans, to see if that play is good, to see if the players are good, and to see how to market the game.
No, absolutely. But I want to kind of get back on track, and we were talking about the Canadian teams ahead. So, So Mark, I know that we were talking about the Ottawa Senators being the lone team outside of the playoff race.
Yep.
Do you think that there's teams that are playing a little bit higher than what they maybe are expected to? Maybe players or teams playing a little bit lower, but.
Well, the biggest thing is just to see what teams are playing where they are in the standings, looking at their roster, seeing who's all there, seeing where they're going, where they're headed. The biggest thing I'll say is that the Habs right now are a big surprise, but just seeing how that roster's constructed, they're built off of speed. So if they play a team that slows them down and is physical, they're going to have some major troubles. But as long as Carey Price is healthy, they're always going to have a shot. Now, Habs fans have said that he's not been the biggest benefactor of their team's success. I say that's complete hooey, because as long as he's doing his job, being healthy, that's his job, is being healthy, because you know what he's going to be doing when he is healthy, stopping pucks, right?
Right.
The Habs will always have a chance at winning. If your goalie can have a 910 to 915 save percentage with a goals against average below 2.7, you're going to win a lot of games, right? If he can stop 95% of those pucks, you're going to be okay, right? Like, granted, the Habs offense isn't great. Their defense is a whole lot worse, right? So as long as Price does his job, they're going to be in contention for a wild card spot. And then the one thing that confuses me, though, is how high up the Vancouver Canucks are in the standings. You look at a team like Calgary, and they're atop the Pacific. But then you look at their goaltending woes, and it's incredibly confusing, because then you look at their division that they're in, Anaheim, Vegas, Los Angeles, San Jose, Edmonton. By no means is that a cakewalk. That's a hard division, right? But then you look at Calgary, Vancouver, and Edmonton are 1, 2, and 3 in the Pacific. To me, that's crazy. I don't even know if that was possible. So I'm just trying to think, what do you think of 1, 2, 3 are Canadian teams, but all three of those teams don't even have a legit, well, Edmonton has a legit number 1, but what do you think of those top 3 teams?
In the end, I would be pretty surprised if 5 teams from Canada make the playoffs. I think that Toronto and Winnipeg are the only locks.
Yep.
And I think that, like you said, you can agree with me on that. I think Montreal's going to fall, because I think Florida's going to be playing better, and Boston is going to be playing better. And I think right now in the Atlantic, it is Tampa Bay, Toronto, Boston, as many of us predicted. But I think that Detroit's not going to be good, and we've seen that. So I think if Florida can turn it around, as I expect that they do, but I think Montreal is going to be competing with a lot of good teams for that wild card. They're going to be competing with the likes of Columbus, New Jersey, Philadelphia for that wild card spot, because we're going to see Pittsburgh and Washington atop of that Metropolitan, and other team, or Carolina's playing out of their mind as well. So there's a lot of good teams that Montreal will have to beat for that wild card spot, but I don't think that they can rely on a Pacific Division spot. And in the Pacific, I can't see Los Angeles being at the bottom of that conference, and I can't see the likes of of San Jose and Anaheim missing the playoffs. They have what you said, the number one center. Both have that. Maybe San Jose not a number one centerman, but they have two number one defensemen, two Norris candidates. And then Anaheim, obviously, they have a very good defensive core. Maybe not a number one defenseman in Anaheim.
No, they have Lindholm.
Hampus Lindholm is maybe a bottom pairing number one defenseman. Like
bottom pairing number
bottom of the list of a number one defenseman.
Oh, okay.
Like
I see what you mean.
Yeah, so like of all the number one defensemen, maybe Lindholm was a great defenseman. Don't get me wrong. But I can't see him as a full number one defenseman. He does it all in Anaheim, and he's good at it. But I do expect Anaheim to jump a few teams and get into that Pacific Division race. But yeah, I still see San Jose winning that division.
Well, the biggest thing for me is like to see how legit the team is, right? You see a team like Vancouver and Edmonton and Calgary atop the Pacific. I'm so befuddled by that. Edmonton to me makes somewhat sense. They have Cam Talbot as their number one. Oscar Klefbom is technically sort of their number one defenseman. McDavid is McDavid. As long as he's healthy, he's got a 100-point season, right? But then Vancouver, Bo Horvat is technically their number one centerman. I think Elias Pettersson is their first-line winger. But he's shooting at a 39 shooting percentage. That's going to fall. Mike Bossy doesn't even hit 18%.
One thing that I'm looking at the Calgary Flames schedule right now.
Yeah.
They have played two games in their division, both against Vancouver, the first 2 games of the year. They won 1-1 against Vancouver. Mm-hmm. So I think that the Pacific Division is tough to play against.
Yes.
And they've played against one team in the Pacific Division. So you can say their schedule has been a little bit on the easier side. They've played more Eastern Conference teams than Western Conference teams. And I think that the West is a more physical team. And I don't know if Calgary is a physical team in itself. I think they're more skill-based, and I think that they're going to suffer against physical teams. So I do see Calgary falling. Vancouver, on the other hand, is another team that has some physical players, but a lot of skill as well. And I think
they have a lot of physical players.
Yeah. Alex
Edler, Michael Del Zotto, Eric Goodbranson.
Alex Edler is injured, but he will be coming back.
No, but like it's just not what is happening to the player right now. It's just what they are.
Right, okay.
Right?
So I stand corrected in that, and I think Vancouver, but I do think that they're going to fall down the standings. I can't see them in the Pacific Division top 3.
Well, and the biggest issue I have with their goaltending situation is how inconsistent they've been. Markstrom has shown that he's capable of being a number one at times by playing tough competition, and so has Anders Nielsen. They've both played good teams. Anders Nielsen has gone into Tampa Bay and Florida and Pittsburgh and has beaten them. But then so has Markstrom. He's gotten into some tough barns, played against... they played against Colorado. Colorado's a good team. Colorado's got that. Team. Colorado has the best number one line in the NHL. Rantanen, McKinnon, Landeskog. That's a good line. So then my question for you is, do you think they plummet down the standings or just simply cool down? Because right now they've won 3 in a row.
Yeah, so maybe not plummet down the standings, but I don't want to offend any Vancouver fans, but I wouldn't be surprised. I still am not going to be surprised if they go for that lottery pick. Like I think that they're not expecting to be in the playoffs. I think they knew that. I think their fans knew that coming in, and I think that this is a good surprise that they're off to a 9-6 record. But I don't think that they're going to stand up to the likes of the San Jose's and the Anaheims and the Los Angeles. Los Angeles is struggling, and I don't think that's going to last. I think they're better than this. But after getting swept in the playoffs by Vegas, they've just had a rough go, and we saw that maybe this is going to be the start of a rebuild. Maybe I can't see Los Angeles rebuilding, but we saw it with Chicago against Nashville in the playoffs 2 years ago. They were the 1 seed, swept, and now they've just been struggling.
Yep. Well, the biggest issue with that, though, is that you need to be careful about your salary cap, right? After you've won your cups, I'm sure the GM and the coaches and the fans don't give a rat's patootie about the salary cap because you won your cups, but it's just one of those things of how long do you want to stay competitive for, right? Because if you give your top players those bloated contracts of 10.5, 11.5, or whatever, right, you're going to have to cut significant roster spaces for that money, right? Because a guy like Alex DeBrincat is in his second season right now, and he's a point per game winger. So next season, if he improves upon this season, his contract ask is going to force him to get traded, because Chicago's salary cap situation right now is not pretty, only because Kane, Taves are both at $21 million, and then Seabrook is at 6.5, 6.4. Duncan Keith is at 5, which is okay because he's worth it. But then Corey Crawford is, I believe, above $5 million. So you have your core players taking up a significant chunk of the salary cap, right? There's the $21 million, and then the 6, so that's 27, and then the 32 because of Duncan Keith, which it could be 33 because of the decimals, right? The 300,000s and the 700,000s. And then you get Corey Crawford's at $5 million. So that brings it up to around 38. Let alone they have Brandon Saad on their team, who I believe is making around $6 million. That's a big contract. So now you're paying 6 guys, 7 guys. No, 6. My bad. 6 guys, $44 million. That's a lot of money. And then if they don't bring home the bacon, don't bring home those W's, you're in trouble, right? Because you have to think about the long term. You have to think about the now in terms of trading your prospects. And I think that the Leafs need to be careful about that. And my question for you is, what do you think will happen with the Leafs' future in terms of that?
Well, I keep on going back to Kyle Dubas saying he's going to sign all the players. They can and they will. But at what point is it starting to be like, oh, are you sure about that? You know what I mean?
Yep.
Obviously, there's tons of cap room in the Leafs right now. What is it, $11 million in cap space?
Yes, 12.
$12 million. They're going to get Jake Gardiner off the books coming up. So there's money to spend on Matthews and Marner, and that's obviously the key. There's a priority, and that's Matthews and Marner, and we are not letting them go. There's no doubt about that. Nylander, I think, is... I know, Mark, you said earlier that you don't want to talk about Nylander, but we're always going to come back to this. We're always going to come back to this. Is when's this deal going to get signed? Is this deal going to get signed? And is Nylander going to be in a Leafs jersey in his next NHL game? And I know that a lot of people are saying, I think he's going to get traded. Let's go to a team that has maybe a surplus in defense, and Carolina has always come to mind in that. But, Mark, you and I talked, and I think the Leafs need a player like maybe Dougie Hamilton or Jakub Slavin, but I don't know if Carolina is willing to give up those 2 players.
Well, and you know what? First things first, we're going to head to break just so we can get a breather on this one. And next up, this song is going to be Muse from Something Human. Welcome back to the CRNC, The Heat. I'm your host, Mark Vanderlucht, otherwise known as Lugsy. Now we're going to be sitting tight here. It's 6:15, 8 degrees outside. I'm here with Zach DeWeird, and we're talking about puck, NHL. And what best way to talk about puck is to involve it with stats. Getting away from the Canadian atmosphere, we're going to be talking about some possession numbers. The nerds of the NHL. Puck possession. Kyle Dubas's favorite dictionary has puck possession number 1 at the top of that dictionary. So, my first thing is to you, Zach. Who do you think has the highest ozone start percentage in the NHL right now?
Am I allowed to cheat?
No.
Shoot, so I should turn my laptop off for a second. Highest ozone starts? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Is it Toronto?
No. This is singular. Like, this is just one player.
Oh, one player. Who
Yes.
has the most offensive zone starts?
Yes.
Is his name Connor McDavid?
No. Keep guessing.
What team does he play for?
San Jose.
Erik Karlsson.
No.
Brent.
No, surprisingly. Well, not surprisingly, but no.
All right.
He's a forward.
I'll take one more guess. Timo Meier.
No, it's Joachim Ryan at 72%.
Come on.
Yeah,
Joachim Ryan. Like I was ever going to guess Joachim Ryan.
That's Joachim Ryan at 72.9%.
He was going to be my next guess.
And now I'm not pulling these numbers off of like, oh, he's played 2 games, this is legit. No, he's played 14 games. So this is a legit number that I'm pulling off.
But do you want to be number 1 in offensive zone starts? That's my question.
No, you really do not. And to show that he's really not that great of a player, do you want to know the amount of points that he's got?
3 assists.
Keep guessing.
5, 1 goal, 4 assists.
Keep guessing. He's a defenseman.
1 point, 1 assist.
Yep. Ding, ding, ding. He's got 1 point in 14 games in the NHL's highest offensive zone starts. He's a defenseman. Oops.
So we're not going to trade him for Nylander.
No. That's an obvious statement. So now my next question is, who do you think has the highest D-zone percent starts?
D-zone percentage. Probably going to be another player. I have no idea, like Nikita Zadorov of Colorado.
Nope. It's a forward.
It's a forward.
For Chicago.
Jonathan Toews.
No.
Actually, Jonathan Toews has done very well offensively this year. Although he had a very good first 6 games, blanked for the next 5, and I think he scored a couple goals the other night. But is it a forward I would know?
Yeah, you would have heard of him. He plays for Chicago. He's in their top 9.
Top 9.
He's a centerman.
Artem Anisimov?
No, it's Marcus Kruger.
Obviously.
Obviously.
I don't like this game very much, Mark.
He's got an 86.3 zone start percentage.
So he's not meant to put the pucks in the net. If you ever thought that Marcus Kruger was Ottawa's number 1 scoring centerman.
But then you look at his Corsi 4 rating, it's at 45%.
So Mark, explain to maybe the viewers that don't know what Corsi stands for.
My mistake.
Right.
I apologize for this. Corsi 4 rating is just a simple shots for, blocks, and misses. It's all of the shots and all of the offensive chances that you could take combined into one category. Right? And then you can do that for Corsi for and Corsi against, and then you mix it into a blender and you get percentages. Right? So then you add those up, you divide them, and this and that and this and that. And then my favorite game is to see what their offensive zone starts are and what their defensive zone starts are. And then you mix that together and determine how good they are as a player, because then you see what their line mates are, you see where their competition of quality is at, and then you see what the team is doing as a result of that.
Right. So you want a high Corsi rating.
Yes.
Because that means you're on the ice for a lot of chances.
But
is that what you're saying?
This is what I actually prefer, is if you have a high defensive zone start percentage with a high Corsi rating.
Right, because that means you start in the defensive zone and then you work that up into attacking play.
Yes.
Right.
You work that into an offensive chance. And then you look at a player like Frederic Gauthier. His zone starts are higher than his offense, or his defensive zone starts are higher than his offensive zone starts.
Yeah.
But he has a 54% Corsi rating.
And again, for the viewers, what is the kind of the Mendoza line of a Corsi rating? Like
50%.
50% is...
But it wavers. It wavers for the amount of offensive zone starts you get and the defensive zone starts you get.
So Corsi is kind of a stat where it does take a little bit to fully understand if a player is good based on Corsi stats. It does take a little bit to just understand, okay, maybe you want this equals a good player. So
yep.
So if you have maybe a 55% offensive zone start, you're an offensive player, but you don't want to be at 70% offensive zone starts, because that means you're a defensive liability. And we've seen, I always thought that players like a Connor McDavid or maybe even like a Steven Stamkos, Nikita Kucherov, who aren't known for their defense, are like much, much higher in the offensive zone, but that's not even the case.
Well, a lot of that is because like it's just their quality of line mates, right? Like it's who they play against, It's their quality of competition, right? You get a guy like Evgeny Malkin, who on every single team except for Toronto and Pittsburgh, he's the number one centerman. But since he's a number two...
Well, he wouldn't be a number one in Edmonton. Let's be real.
No, true.
Okay, there's probably 4 or 5 teams.
3 teams. There are 3 teams, Pittsburgh, Toronto, and Edmonton. 3 teams. That's it. That's all.
Would Malcolm be a number 3 centerman on Toronto? John Tavares would be the number 3 centerman on Toronto.
Could you imagine
That's nice to fantasize about. That's never happened. Toronto fans, don't get the wrong idea here. We're not Evgeny Malkin to Toronto confirmed.
Evgeny Malkin to Toronto confirmed. Trade Nylander for Malkin, please. No, but the one thing is that I look at a guy like Evgeny Malkin, who is a 100-point scorer. He's capable of that. We've seen him do it. He's a great scorer.
When he plays 82 games, he's getting 100 points.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Without a doubt, he's that special of a player. He is, without a doubt, top 10 in the NHL. And Pittsburgh has 2 of those guys. Crosby and Malkin. That's pretty good. But when you look at a player like Malkin, though, he's a great player. He has elite offensive skill. You look at his defensive zone starts versus those offensive zone starts. It's not pretty. Because he in fact is sheltered very heavily offensively. But he brings home the bacon on offense. So you never have to worry about sheltering him too much because you know he's going to put out when he's healthy.
Absolutely.
So then what do you think about a player like Nazem Kadri being able to score 30 goals but has a 30% offensive zone start versus a 60% defensive zone start?
So he has a 60% defensive zone start?
Yes.
And a 40% offensive zone.
Yes.
So that should just goes to show what kind of player Kadri is. And he's arguably, if not, the best third-line center in the league. I think on a lot of teams he'd be number 2. I don't know if he'd ever be a number 1, but...
No.
But, hey, 30 goals on your third line, that you're doing something right. And he's a defensive player. Like, he's on the checking line, as many would say that third line is, and he is often paired. Last year he was a lot, often paired against the team's top line because he's a defensively sound player, and he is a defense first player. It seems like a lot of the times he understands that if you can stop that team's top line and then let the scores come out against line 2, 3, 4, and so on, you're doing yourself a favor. You don't have to score if you're a defensive player. There are players on each team that are on the team for defense. And Kadri is fantastic because he understands the defensive game, but he knows how to put the puck in the net as well. He hasn't done it a ton this year. He's kind of struggling a little bit, but he'll find his groove. He's a 25-goal scorer. You can pretty much lock that in if he plays 82. And if he scores 25, I'm very happy because we have players like Matthews, like Tavares, like Marner, who can score 30 goals, dish in 60 assists. We have 3 players who are almost locks for 85 points. So Kadri doesn't have to be that player, right? Once Tavares came, Kadri can now even focus on defense even more. Because, well, I guess now that Matthews is out, he has to focus on offense a little more, so maybe he's kind of back where he was last year. But I think it's fantastic because Kadri can now focus on defense with the addition of Tavares. Like I said, Matthews out, but still. And I think it really has benefited the Leafs because when Matthews was playing, we really did play well defensively, in my opinion. Even when October is not maybe Freddie Anderson's best month, we still ended up out of October with a very good record of like 8-5.
Well, and a lot of that has to do with the amount of depth that Toronto has and how easily it is to roll those offensive lines with that defense and then having steady Freddie in net, right? When you have a 30-goal scorer on your third line, you're going to beat a lot of teams, right? It's just a matter of fact, right? When you have Nazem Kadri shutting down a top line, and then you have either Austin Matthews or Tavares going up against a second line, and then you can choose one of those guys going up against a third line. You're going to do some major damage because not only is it that Matthews is good and Tavares is good, but it's the line mates they have that are also equally, well, not equally as good as them, but definitely help push the needle for the centerman, right? Because you get Hyman, Marner, Marleau, Kapanen. Those are good players. Very good players. Marleau has some speed. Granted, he's getting up there in age. He's shown it at times early on in the season, but he is a sporadic scorer. So we know that with this dip in scoring, all of a sudden, these past 2 games he's scored now. We know that he's going to score more goals in bunches, right? He's going to go through these goal-scoring binges, but then you get to a player like Marner, who is an offensive catalyst. He just drives play. He's a machine. He's gritty as well. He's not going to throw the body a lot, but he's going to fight for the pucks, right? And that helps him play his game the way it makes him successful, is by generating a lot of offensive chances. And then you have a player with Kapanen playing with Matthews. Right now it's not that way, obviously, because of the injury. But with a speedster like the Finnish Flash, Kasperi Kapanen, he's going to generate a lot of offense because of his speed, right? And that's difficult to deal with as a defenseman. Speed kills. And if you go up against a fast player, that's probably across the board the most intimidating tool to have going up against any player is speed. So then what do you think about the Leafs' offensive depth in terms of who should be on the Leafs roster in the next future and where it should go?
Well, I'm not. I know that you are much more into the AHL system, and maybe the players playing away from Canada but are still under the Leafs wing. But I think that there's, what I've heard, there's more speed coming up in the minors. We have more prospects that are pretty fast. I heard Jamie Bracco's a pretty quick player as well. Carl Grundstrom, I heard, is a pretty quick player. And obviously William Nylander is a pretty fast player. He's currently not on the Leafs. So that's 3 more guys who are probably faster than half the league that are able to come in the next. Nylander could come eventually tomorrow, but Bracco and Grundstrom likely will fit in the Leafs lineup in the next 2 or 3 years at the very least. Maybe this year, maybe next year as well. But I think the Leafs are in very good hands, but I do think that it might be a little scary cap situation-wise. And we've always known this because we have fast players, and fast players are a thing that each team needs because this is now a speed and skill league. It's not as much of a physical league as it was maybe in the early part of last decade, when it was you got to have a couple goons on your team if you want to do well, or even back in the 70s, 80s, 90s when there were teams that just went for physicality as well. But yeah, I think the Leafs are in good hands coming up because we have fast guys coming up.
Wow, okay, so then to bounce off of your points right there, it's not so much just the speed that they have coming up, it's also the grit and the two-way ability as well that they're developing. Because what we saw with Kapanen and Andreas Janssen, before they got to the Marlies, their defensive game was almost non-existent, right? But in order to be able to play for Babcock's Leafs, you need to be two-way dependable. Even though Marner will never be up for the Selke, neither will Nylander, it's important for Babcock to be able to teach them to play defense, right? You need to be able to hold your own 5v5. You don't need a PK. You don't need to block shots all the time, right? That blocking shots leads to injuries. Throwing the body can lead to injuries, right? You just need to be able to be two-way dependent. And the Leafs have a lot of prospects coming up that are not only able to put the puck in the net, but can hold down the fort when they need to. And with the defense, especially on top of that, I like where they're headed in terms of mobility and skill, because Rasmus Sandin has a lot of promise. He's 18 years old going on 30 every time he's on the ice. And then you have a Timothy Liljegren, who's a swing for the fences pick. And if he pans out to be anything for what the Leafs need, oh boy, he's a special player. My only issue with him is he gets tunnel vision so horribly. He rushes plays and that's it. Timothy Liljegren His only issue, if he were 6'4", he's a top 5 pick in this past draft. I guarantee it. Top 5.
I heard that he was even supposed to go top 5 if he didn't miss half of his draft year because of mono.
Oh, you mean Timothy Liljegren?
Oh, is that? I thought you were talking. Are we talking about Liljegren or Sandin?
Both.
Both. Okay. No, but isn't that the story about Liljegren? That he was supposed to get drafted much, much higher.
Yes.
We got him at 21.
Well, no, 7. We got him at 18 or 17.
Oh, okay. So a little
17.
earlier.
We got him at 17. But the fact is, though, Sandin plays such an efficient game. Like, he's so mature when he's moving the puck up. He already knows what he's doing, right? But Liljegren, it's like he doesn't quite know, and he just goes as he's playing. Sandin, you can tell that he's thinking about his line mates and where to put the puck in the net, which is why I think he's not quite leapfrogged Liljegren, but he's got a much safer floor in the NHL than Liljegren. Because Liljegren is a swing for the fences pick, right? It's either he's going to be a top pairing defenseman or not in the NHL, I feel. Sandin is a guaranteed top 6 NHL defenseman. For me, he's guaranteed. His only issue is size and the lack of it. And the NHL is a big league. It's physical, it's fast, and it's strong. But he's a good enough skater where he can get by. So far in the AHL, he's doing well. He's got 2 goals in 2 games. But it's his problem that he's just not big enough to handle the NHL forwards, maybe, right, is what might limit his ceiling. So, and then I'm just wondering about what you think about Sandin and where he could go for the Leafs.
I think you nailed it, honestly. There's not one thing that you said that I disagree with, really, but I think I'm excited for it. I think that he could be in the NHL in next season. He could potentially be in the NHL, and I think you're absolutely right in saying that he may have leapfrog Liljegren. I don't think you're wrong in saying that. So I think it's, as of right now, it might even be just a heads or tails game between Liljegren and Sandin of who we see in the NHL right now. It's anybody's guess, but I think right now we think, oh, the Leafs defense isn't great, but I think the Leafs future defense is pretty good. We have some good, and we can talk more about the defense. Justin Holl is another player that is capable of being in the NHL, in my opinion, as well. I don't know if is he with the Marlies? Because I know he's been healthy.
No, he's with the Leafs. He's played the past couple of games with the Leafs.
Okay, so he is an NHL defenseman right now,
yeah.
and he's an up-and-comer. I don't know how old he is, but...
No, he's 26.
26, okay.
So his ceiling is very limited.
Right.
His floor is a very safe-ish floor.
Yeah. Okay,
so my biggest thing I will ask you about this is how much cap movement do you think the Leafs will do based on their prospects and their current roster players?
Yeah, that's tough. Like, I know, Mark, you and I talked about maybe we have to get rid of a player this year. Like, maybe it has to be either Marleau or somebody else. But I want Marleau on our team. Marleau's a great player. And yes, he has a $6.25 million cap hit in there, and that would help us immensely in the future. But he's only on for 2 more seasons, and I think people don't understand how much that veteran leadership is important to a young team. And I think that obviously you don't pay a guy $6 million to be a veteran leader, but he also has he's on our top line and he's putting the puck in the net. So people are like, oh, why do we have a guy who's worth $6 million when we could switch him out? But he's a good player. He's the leader in points on a team. He has over 1,200 points. He's not a bad player.
Oh, for the San Jose Sharks.
For the San Jose Sharks.
Right, yeah, he's all-time points. Yes. Yes.
Right. So people are like, why don't we just give Marleau's contract to Arizona? Like, I don't know if maybe you mentioned that.
I did.
And I disagree with you in that. I think that we should keep Marleau, and it would help our cap space. But I think that he does have a presence in the Leafs locker room, and I think that he's a good player.
My issue with him is that he doesn't put up enough production for his cap hit. Granted, he was a free agent signing, so that obviously pushed his cap hit higher because he had options to go to. He could have either chosen to stay with San Jose or to gone to Detroit, right? He had options, so that's why his cap hit was driven up. My only issue is that Matthews needs a new contract. Marner needs a new contract. Nylander right now needs a new contract. So you have so many of these players that need contracts, and you have this guy who's not performing up to that cap hit, just holding up money, right? If Marleau is not on the Leafs roster right now.
Nylander is on the roster.
Yes. It's done. It's already done, right? But that cap hit is probably closer to $8 million.
Right.
Because of that. In which I think Dubas is doing the right thing right now by standing firm. There have been so many reports saying, or not reports, but just so many articles and comments saying, oh, just sign him already. Sign him. No, you can't. You cannot let the inmates run the asylum. With a player that skilled, you cannot let that happen. And with that, I think you get a guy like Connor Brown who's currently making $2.1 million. He's gone next season. Because you can replace that with Carl Grundstrom. Carl Grundstrom and then Jeremy Bracco can replace whoever, right? Kasperi Kapanen needs a new contract next season. I certainly hope he doesn't ask for $5 million because he's not getting that. You post up one good season and now you're worth $5 million? Why? You've done one good season and you're playing with the NHL's best centerman. What makes you worth $5 million? You're a fast player. You're skilled. But you're playing with good line mates this time. Last year and the year before, you were playing on the fourth line. What were you doing? You put up 9 points in 50 games. Now you finally have put up production. You got 12 points in 14 games. Good for you, you moron. What have you done for the Leafs? You're a clutch player. That's great. But do you drive play? No. You rely on your teammates. That's my only issue with Kapanen. He's a great player, ice in his veins, scores when you need him to. But what does he do? What does he bring? He brings speed, skill, grit, playing the PK, playing the power play. He's clutch. Does he drive a line, though? No, he needs good line mates to open up space for him, right? So then you get another guy like Josh Lavo, who I think is potentially gone after the season. He's, in my mind, useless. I think that's a generous way of saying that.
I do feel bad for Lavo.
Yeah, but
he's been in the doghouse of Babcock's for a long time.
He's finally playing, though, so I don't understand why he's not putting out production anymore. Sure, he's playing 8 to 10 minutes a night, but if you're playing, how can I don't know. I'm not happy with what Lavo has done. He put up this whole stink about not being able to play, and now he's not producing with his playing time. So my opinion is, what do you think happens to a guy like Lavo or even like Kapanen for next season? What do you think happens to them? Traded?
I think you and I are both scared that Kapanen is going to ask for much more than what he's worth.
Yeah.
And I want to know what you think Kapanen is worth. What would you give Kapanen?
4 at the most. Okay. Over 4 years.
Okay, I was going to say like 3.5.
Yeah.
And if we get him for 3.5, I think that's a great deal. But I don't think Kapanen is going to want that. No. I think Kapanen is going to want closer to 4, 4.5, even 5. And like you said, that's too much, especially with their cow situation. And we said this about Nylander, but players don't care. Like, we can say, "Oh, Matthews, Marner need contract. Why don't you just play to win?" But players don't care.
No, they give no rips about what the team's cap situation is most of the time.
Right.
Sometimes you will get exceptions like John Tavares, Patrick Kane, John Toews before they got their $10.5 million cap hit, right? Crosby and McDavid are the two only exceptions where whatever they want, they can get it, right? And I'm a strong believer in, if you want that big cap hit, you better be able to produce to it, right? If you ask for that money, boy, you better play up to it, right? If you don't produce, you just screwed your team over. Right? So right now, we're going to be taking another break. And this song is by the Imagine Dragons, and it's Believer. Welcome back to the Knights Sports Show. I'm your host, Mark Vanderlucht, otherwise known as Lugsy. For the last 10 minutes, we're going to be talking about just a few of the conundrums and misfortunes of the NHL teams with their salary cap. I've just been looking at the Detroit Red Wings and I feel sad for them. But they should be somewhat okay in the next few years. They have some money coming off of their books. They currently are in a bit of a pickle. They're near the basement of the NHL in the standings. They're not doing too hot. Zach, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it does suck for Detroit that they're a storied franchise. They've been so good for so many years, and now they're kind of at the bottom of the barrel for a lot of their NHL games. But currently, they're one of only 2 teams that have a projected cap space of $0, and to think that they're one of the bottom dwellers of the NHL is kind of surprising, because you see the Leafs, who are at the top of the NHL, they have $11 million. Carolina has $16 million in cap space, and they're leading the Metropolitan Division. So you just wonder if, what is going on with the Red Wings? Well, Jimmy Howard is not Jimmy Howard anymore, and he is getting paid almost $6 million. And then Nicholas Kronwall is not what Nicholas Kronwall was before. He's getting paid almost $5 million. And Gustav Nyquist, he had one good year and got a pretty fat contract. And Gustav Nyquist is not a bad player, maybe a second-line winger, but he's getting almost paid $5 million. But yeah, $23 million is coming off the books for Detroit, so they have a lot of room to improve their forward and defensive depth, and maybe that's what they have to do in this upcoming free agency, or maybe they can dump a couple contracts and just start the rebuild, because I don't know what direction they're going in right now.
It's tough to really quantify what direction they truly are headed in, because Ken Holland keeps signing these weird free agents, right? Like they just signed, well, not just signed, but they signed Thomas Vanek. They have Mike Green on their team. They signed Franz Nielsen a couple of off seasons ago. To me, it just confuses me so much. Why sign these veterans when you haven't made the playoffs? You won your cup in 2008, and you finally did not make the playoffs last season or the season before.
I think it's been 2 years that they've been out.
Okay, so my point exactly. If you go seasons consecutively without making the playoffs, you should reevaluate your roster and restart, right? Their cap situation is bad. Dylan Larkin is the only good contract, only great contract on that roster.
So I think Dylan Larkin, understandably, is who they're kind of building their lineup around. And he, understandably, is the highest paid player on that team. And that's good. So then there's players like Nyquist who are coming off the books. There's players like Kronwall who are coming off the books. But then there's some ugly contracts. There's Franz Nielsen, who's got 4 more seasons.
Justin
Abdelkader is getting paid $4.25 for 5 seasons.
And you know what line he's playing on?
Can I guess?
Yes.
4.
Yep.
And Danny DeKeyser is getting $5 million for 4 seasons. Like, DeKeyser's not a bad defenseman, but that's
$5 million?
$5 million is questionable. So, and then thankfully Jimmy Howard is coming off the books, because he's kind of lost it, in my opinion. He's not being Jimmy Howard, the one that won Detroit the cup.
Well, he's 34.
He's 34, absolutely. So there's a reason why he's kind of fading out, but it's been a tough couple of years for Jimmy Howard. He's been losing his job. He pretty much lost it to Peter Mrazek a couple seasons ago, or was that last season?
Well, you know what? Mrazek is an inconsistent goalie, so he went through a whole bunch of stretches. Mrazek even ended up on Philadelphia last season, right? Where he first few games he played for Philly, he was lights out. No one could stop him, or no one could beat him, right? He bangs off a shutout and then won his next 2 starts, but then he got blown totally wide open after those starts. And then he just went back to being normal again, right? It was almost as if a fire had been lit underneath him and said, oh, wow, I don't like being traded. Let's prove to Detroit that they made the wrong choice. Well, and then he plays well, but then he can't stop a beach ball after those chunks of games. And now he's ended up on Carolina, and last night he was a healthy scratch. Granted, they have 3 goalies. Sure, Scott Darling is okay, And McElhinney, when given the right team, he's a good goalie. But when you're in your 20s and you get healthy scratched over two goalies in their 30s, and one goalie is a fossil, you got to reevaluate how you're playing, right? And then that shows with Carolina. They've just lost 3 in a row. They're finally coming back down to earth. And I know it, and I can feel it in my bones. If you do not have a number one goalie, you will not make the playoffs. So, my question for you is, what makes you think Carolina will make the playoffs this year?
I just think that their forward and defensive depth is there. I think they have a lot of good forwards, and I think that they play well together. I think that chemistry is a massive thing in teams, and I think Carolina has one of the best in the NHL. Like, I've seen them play a couple games, and they've done very well. There's a reason why they have 8 wins on their season, and I don't think it's by fluke. I don't think that they're going to lead the Metropolitan. There's too many good teams in that division. There's New Jersey, there's Pittsburgh, there's the defending champions, Washington, who are not going to miss the playoffs as they're out of the playoff position now. So I see Carolina maybe getting that second wild card spot, just squeaking in ahead of the likes of maybe the Islanders, Montreal, Buffalo. I think those 4 teams are going to be in a bit of a race. Maybe you can add Philadelphia in there as well. I think Columbus might sneak into that third Metropolitan spot, but
which they currently are holding right now.
Okay, so I believe Pittsburgh, Washington 1-2, Columbus and New Jersey are going to battle for first wild card in that third spot, and then it's going to be the likes of Carolina, Philadelphia, Columbus, whoever getting the second one. Maybe I repeated myself a little bit there, but anyways, I do like Carolina. I like Sebastian Aho a lot. He's done very well this season. He's in the top 10 in points. And then there's players around him that can score as well. They have Teuvo Teravainen. They have Justin Williams, who is not a bad player.
Who can support.
Excuse me. And then they have solid defensemen. Not any really number one defenseman. Jakub Slavin is getting there.
It's like a community of good defensemen.
Slavin, Dougie Hamilton, Justin Falk is solid in his role as a second pairing defenseman. I think he's a very good defenseman. And then like you said, the goaltending woes are going to be their downfall.
And now that is very fair analysis, but unfortunately, as this episode has gone on, we have run out of time. And with that, I say, I bid adieu to the listeners. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Mark Vanderluck, and this is CRNC The Heat with guest host Zach DeWeird. Au revoir. Sayonara.
Have a good night.